So I'm Linda de Castecker. I'm a public health doctor. I'm part of the Care Visions team. Let me start then by saying, Bettina, welcome. It's lovely to have you and thank you for helping us with these family talks. Can you
No.
just tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what you do and why you're
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. So my background, well, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. That's my professional training, which is really in mental health. And I focused in on child and family very early on. But actually, I had a very difficult relationship with education when I was a kid. I really came out having kind of failed school, really, failed all my A levels, and then went back into education in my 20s and just became so interested in psychology and I couldn't stop studying. I kept doing degree after degree after degree. But I think it kind of left me with this really passionate desire to understand and help young people. I think, first of all, thinking about learning and how can kids become so disengaged with learning, and thinking about mental health. I trained in pediatric neuropsychology, so thinking about the brain, learning a bit about neuroscience. And then actually became really interested in the neuroscience of the teenage brain, because there's this incredible knowledge we now know about teenagers and what happens during this time. And I published a book called The Incredible Teenage Brain. It's up on the shelf there with, you see in the middle, all the
Oh,
different
yes.
translations. It's been translated into 8 different languages now. And so that's become a bit of a specialist interest for me. I mean, currently I work, I have a private practice. I do some writing. I do some vlogging. I work at UCL, kind of doing some lecturing for masters and doctorate, students there. So I have a real breadth of what I do, and it's really always really enjoyable work.
It's really interesting that you said you struggled at school and then
Mm,
you've gone on to learn maybe why that was or some of the things that could have prevented it. And I always think that life experience is so important. I got very interested in parenting and support for parents because I personally found it a very hard job
yeah,
and didn't always find it straightforward. So I think
yeah.
you're maybe in a similar situation about school based.
Yeah, I think it really gives you that compassion and also this that drive to understand. I couldn't understand why I really felt at school like I was really a bit dumb. I felt like I couldn't do it and I was very disengaged from learning and then I went on when I found education. I don't think any of us are dumb actually, but it managed to engage my brain in a different way and that was really important. It felt really important. Feels really important work for me
Yeah.
to think about how do we engage and motivate young people and keep them connected to the adults around them.
And I know you've got a special interest as well in neurodiversity, and that's
Yeah.
something that certainly in Care Visions we've been thinking a lot about and looking at the evidence for how we can support parents and young people with neurodiversity. And there's such a lot talked about it just now, but it's quite a modern term, isn't it? It's not
Yeah.
something that has always been discussed.
Mm.
What is neurodiversity,
Yeah.
and what can you tell us about it in terms of understanding the teenage brain or the brain in general?
The brain in general. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, in many ways, neurodiversity is quite a recent concept. I mean, some would say it's really quite revolutionary. It's a bit of a paradigm shift. And it's kind of moving away from more of a medical model of thinking about some people have a disorder or don't have a disorder to thinking about valuing all the different types of brains there are in the world. So we think about biodiversity or cultural diversity. There's diversity across the world in all of those areas. And it's similar for the brain. So it actually originated among individuals who had autism, and they really wanted to be seen as different and not disabled. So it's really this move away from an idea of disability and cure and fixing and dysfunctional, just to saying that we're all different. Actually, there's no such thing as normal and abnormal. Our brains are all very different. Now, I think at the edges, what you get are groups of people who you might call neurodivergent. So we are all diverse. But at some edges, some young people and their brain stands out as quite divergent and they need really special consideration and accommodation, which is really what a lot of what neurodiversity does in terms of helping young people. I mean, the other thing to say about the movement is it really tries to emphasize the positive dimension
Yeah.
of lives and the strengths and discovering the unique way in which neurodiverse and neurodivergent individuals can contribute to society. So it's a real kind of paradigm shift in a very positive way.
Yeah, I remember talking to somebody and I talked about prevention, and they said that's the wrong term for
Yeah.
neurodiversity because there's strengths, and as you say, we're all on a
Yeah.
diverse spectrum, if that's
We're
the right
all on a
word.
spectrum
Yeah,
of something somewhere. We all have a different type of brain and we can kind of group each other. I mean, I would say I've never had a diagnosis I haven't had a diagnosis, but of anything, I've got a bit of an ADHD brain. I think that's one of the things that was going on for me at school. It's given me lots of benefits, but I think given the context that I was in, I couldn't really focus. I mean, there were other factors that went on, but I think that's one of them. So, yeah, it really makes sense to me just to understand your own brain. Like, how is my brain different or similar to other people?
yeah, and it's understanding yourself, isn't it, as well as
Yeah.
other people understanding you. So you talked about diagnosis.
Yeah.
Is that the right term, given we're
Well,
trying not
it's
to?
a bit tricky because we
Yeah,
are, I suppose, in a bit of there's a bit of what would you say? It's a bit of a conflict of what we're saying in some
yeah,
ways because we are saying, yeah, we're all neurodiverse, but we're also still do use a medical model for certain neurodiverse brains, and particularly the ones that stand out are autism, ADHD, and then there's dyslexia and dyspraxia, and we still have all those terms.
yeah.
So yeah, you would still go to a professional in order to understand. I mean, in the new language, I suppose we say to understand your neurodivergence,
Yeah.
but it is still often a medical professional who will diagnose.
And what about self-diagnosis or a parent trying to diagnose their child? Because there's a lot of surveys, questionnaires on the internet, and
Mm,
people are often saying to me now, "Oh, I think I've got ADHD. I didn't know that before, but I've
yeah.
done this survey or questionnaire." Are they reliable? Should we encourage people to use them?
Mm. Well, I think there's a lot of information that you can find out online. There are some good screener type questionnaires and quizzes that you can take, and I think it does help you understand yourself. I would say if you're really thinking about a diagnosis for yourself or somebody else, they're not reliable. So what
Right.
that means is they might say that you have something, you definitely fit the criteria when you don't, and they may say you don't fit the criteria when you do. So if you really want to understand somebody who is really struggling, and I suppose the people who it feels really relevant for, the children or the adults, is where it's having a big functional impact on your life. So if you're really not able to live life in the way that you would want to, you're not able to, sleep or learn or engage socially or eat or exercise or all of those things. If something is feeling overwhelmingly hard for you, then neurodiversity is one area that we might consider, and then you would want to go and see a medical professional. And one of the reasons, I mean, usually it would be with a team. And I think one of the problems with some of this online diagnosis is that it's kind of quick and dirty. You, if we're thinking about these differences and we really want to understand ourselves, you want to have quite a significant amount of time with somebody who really knows what they're looking at, preferably face to face, and who can do what they call a differential diagnosis. So, you want to make sure that you're not looking at something else. You could easily, something with ADHD has some overlapping symptoms with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, for example. And the treatments for those would be very different. So you really do need to get in front of a professional if it's having a functional impact on your life or your child's or the child that you're caring for, and you want to understand why. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And that does make sense. But for many parents, particularly, they see their child struggling
Yeah.
and they get a referral to child and adolescent mental health services and they get told, well, maybe in 4 years' time we'll be able to see you because they're so overwhelmed. So what now obviously if you're seeing a parent, you're seeing them as a professional, but what could we advise parents in these kind of circumstances?
So I think there are definitely things you can do, and that's where I think the internet and the online world, including some of the social media stuff, as long as you're listening to the right people, people who are really valid, can be very helpful because I suppose what we're thinking about when we're thinking about neurodiversity is that we all have a profile of strengths and weaknesses and some skills that are more developed than others. Where there's neurodivergence, that profile is very uneven. So we're significantly better at some things than other things, or we're developmentally on task for many things, but there are some things that we aren't. And I think one of the things that you can do as a parent in that waiting time is to think about what actually is causing the problem here. Like, what is the skill that my child is struggling with? And a lot of what we do with neurodiversity is accommodation, actually, is actually changing the environment. So one of the things that one of the kind of underlying kind of beliefs about this movement of neurodiversity is not that there's a problem with the person. It's that there's a mismatch between the person and the environment.
Right.
So often what we're trying to do is say, how do we need to change the environment in order that this person can fit into it? So I think a parent can do some of that. They can definitely do it at home. I think when you start looking at school and education, sometimes they say, we're not going to do anything until we have a diagnosis. That can be a bit of a problem. But there are certainly things that you can do at home. I mean, I could talk a bit in detail about that, but
Well,
does that make
it
sense?
would be good. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Just maybe some of the common
Yeah.
symptoms or challenges that you've come across and what parents can do if they haven't yet got to see a professional.
Yeah. So if we think about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I think that's a lot of people are recognizing that in themselves. So first of all, you've got to kind of know and understand the underlying difficulties. So they're to do with attention. And it's not actually that people with ADHD can't attend, it's that they struggle to manage their attention. So when things are very interesting to them, they can focus quite well. When there's low interest, it's very hard to focus and they can't switch attention. So there's some attention difficulties. Impulsivity, so that's jumping in very quickly and saying things before somebody's had a chance to, before your frontal lobes basically have had a chance to have a say. And the other thing is hyperactivity, which is the need to move around. So the first thing you really need to do is to do a really good analysis. Let's say you've got a child who, well, let's say they're getting a lot of detentions at school and the teacher says, oh, they're forever getting in trouble. So first of all, we have to work out what is my belief about why that is going wrong. And this is where the neurodiversity helps. If I think to myself, they're just being a difficult child, they're trying to make life difficult for me, then that has an effect on how I approach it and what I think needs to be done. I might think I need to talk to them, I need to punish them. If you think to yourself, actually, I think that young person is really struggling to attend and focus when interest is low, then you have to make some small adjustments to the environment in order to support them. And often the strategies that we use are not that, they're really not rocket science. They're not that exciting. They're having movement breaks. They're breaking things down into small chunks. They are, giving the child a task that's motivating to them, those kinds of things. You can do the same thing, at home if you have a child who's struggling with homework, is using these little small strategies that will help them to focus their attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the executive function skills, which are housed in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, are very important here. And a lot of people with neurodiversity struggle with these executive functions, our ability to plan and organize and manage our time and inhibit our responses and those kinds of things. And they can be underdeveloped. So a really big thing is working out almost forensically, saying what is actually going on here that will help me understand the skill that I need to strengthen in my child in order to deal with the behavior.
So some of the things that without thinking about neurodiversity, if I'm finding it difficult to plan or manage my time, I'm somebody who makes lists and,
Yes,
writes it all down,
exactly.
ticks them off. I mean, are these the same strategies that you would adopt?
They're exactly the same strategies. I think we think executive functions and we think, oh, it's all clever and to do with the brain. And actually, it's those small things that make all the difference. I think the thing with executive function and these skills is that they take a long time to develop, and kids are often not motivated to develop them. I mean, actually, these executive function skills are skills that predict our success at school, in relationships, in our jobs. They have a lot to say in our kind of success, how successful we are in life. Yet we don't teach them to kids. We don't say to kids, you've got these skills in your brain, and it's a bit like going to the gym. The more you build the skill, the more you focus on it, the stronger that skill can become. But actually, we can do that. We can give them a name right from the beginning. We can say to them, I think what happened over there was you lost focus. And I think that's why suddenly, you were finding yourself on, I don't know, playing the game or under the table or whatever it was. Instead of going, what are you doing? We can give it a name. When they jump in and say something without thinking, we can say, I think what you need in that moment is for your frontal lobe to click in more quickly to stop you from saying those things. A kid who will touch something and then go, oh, sorry. We can say to them, that is your frontal lobe that needs engaging here. That's your impulsivity.
And so you
Yeah.
can teach a child how
Yeah.
to develop that part of their brain.
You
I know
really
that
can.
maybe this is a good time for you to talk a wee bit about the teen brain when so many of the neurons and synapses are developing, and
Yeah.
that would be helpful just now.
Definitely. Well, I mean, just to say that we actually can teach kids about their executive functions right from the beginning.
Yeah.
There's an approach in Canada, somebody called Laurie Faith has set up, for those of you who are educators, something called activated learning. It's really worth looking up, where they literally teach 4-year-olds what the executive functions are. They have these great names for all the executive functions. So you can teach them from very early on. But the teenage years is a great time to teach them, because the frontal lobes of our brain are developing during the teenage years. So let me just say something about the teenage brain. I think it's really fascinating. So at the turn of the century, we knew almost nothing about the teenage brain. Actually, when I was at school, what I learned was that most of the brain developed in the first few years of life and they were pretty much set. That's what we used to think,
That's
didn't
right.
we?
Just goes downhill from then.
Exactly. It's too late. But then around the turn of the century, actually, what kind of made people interested in this area was the fact that there's this really stark statistic that while the teenage years is physically the most healthy time in our life, it is also the time when you are most likely to develop a mental health problem. And 75% of mental health difficulties actually start during this teenage years. So then it was about the same time that we had MRI scans able to look at the brain when it's alive. People started scanning the brains of teenagers when they were alive and doing things. And they saw, wow, it's just incredible. Actually, something happens around the time of puberty, kicked off by the hormones that come into the brain at the beginning of puberty. So, around the age of 11, secondary school, something like that. And the brain is on a very particular setting all the way through to mid-20s. So this idea that the brain is developed at 18 is not. Actually, it's a very vulnerable time, I think, between 18 and 25, because you're still going through this time of incredible vulnerability where you're basically a sponge for experience. Your brain is taking in everything that's happening to you. At the same time that you have a lot of kind of social and emotional drives in your brain. So if you think about what a teenager's driven towards, what are they interested in? They're interested in friends. They're interested in their self-identity. They're interested in autonomy and independence. They want to take risks, try new adventures. It's a very emotional time. And what we find is that the bits of the brain that support that functioning are developing during the teenage years, just when a person is driven towards that part of the world. So there's this beautiful coupling of the brain and the environment. So it's an incredible time of opportunity for brain growth, but also an incredibly vulnerable time.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
for many of the children in care visions, they will have had huge levels of trauma in their early years. Can that be reversed, recovered from in the teenage
Yeah.
years?
Well, there's a real opportunity, absolutely, for recovering and for kind of building the brain. I mean, I think we have to be honest about we can't wipe out
Yeah,
experience.
yeah,
So sometimes you can think about brain construction a bit like a building. And if some of the early blocks are a bit wobbly, then it's going to be there are some things you can't reverse, but there's definitely an enormous amount that you can do, particularly during these teenage years. And I think what the research is showing us is actually the key thing, the most important thing during this time is relationships.
yeah,
Is that teenagers, particularly ones who've had a difficult early experience, have a solid, strong, responsive adult and relationship in their life where they feel they belong, where they can connect with another person. Because that gives them the kind of safety, almost like, and we call it in one of our courses, the base camp. They need a really, really strong base camp from which they can go and do all the things teenagers have to do. Teenagers have to go off and have all these adventures, like huge adventures in life, don't you? You have to go off and discover all kinds of things about the world. But you also really need somewhere where you can come back and somewhere that will accept you for all that you are, however messy you are, and where you really feel like you belong.
yeah.
So, yeah, there's an enormous amount of positive things that can happen with the safety of the relationship at the basis of it, really.
The other controversy around neurodiversity is medical treatment and drug treatment.
Yeah.
And a number of parents will welcome treatment, others may be worried about that.
Yeah.
What's your view on, well, particularly I suppose we're thinking of ADHD in this
Yeah.
setting?
And I think that's one of the challenges really for the neurodiversity movement is particularly when we think about ADHD, because there is this medication that is very effective for helping with our attention and with our focus. And it is, all the research shows, much more effective at helping with attention and to kind of calm the brain down so it can focus, much more than anything behavioral that we could possibly do. So that tempts us to say, well, therefore you've got a medical condition. But I think we have to move away from that. I think we would all improve our attention and focus with this medication.
Right.
But for some people, it's just really essential. And it really, I think when I started off, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a kind of medical doctor. I think when I first started off in this world, I was like, we shouldn't be medicating children and was a bit anti it. But I have to say, for some children and people, it's just really makes an enormous difference to their lives. And I think it not only does help them with their achievement, academic achievement or what other kind of achievement, but it also makes the world a kind of more comfortable place, I think, to be. Because the thing with ADHD, if you think you haven't got your frontal lobes, you're often quite impulsive, you're jumping up and down, you can be quite irritating to people around you. And what this medication does is it means that the world receives you in a more positive way. So I think medication does work. It works for some children in particular. There's short-acting medication. There's no evidence, no really strong evidence that it has a negative impact on brain development. And I think it's been around for quite a while now. So it is something I think we really have to consider when we're thinking about kids with medication. I mean, the other thing I would say is if you're giving medication, it would be my advice to also think about skills. We can't just give pills.
Yeah.
We have to say, let's do the skills too, because these executive functions are what are causing kids with ADHD or people with ADHD a problem. Time management, planning, impulsivity, all those things. So we have to be teaching those skills, I think, alongside the pills. With autism, there isn't really any medication. I mean, I have known children to have medication which can sometimes help with regulation, with calming, because a lot of kids with ADHD can really struggle with feeling very overloaded. But it certainly wouldn't be the first point of call, and I think it's quite rare. So it's really only ADHD that we're thinking about for medication.
And once you're on medication, do most people stay on it for life or for a
Yeah.
long time, or is it kind of you can be off and on it at different
Yeah.
times?
Well, the great thing about the short-acting medication, it lasts for 4 to 8 hours, and
All
you
right.
just take it for the time you want it, and it's out of your bloodstream. So that you actually can just come on and off. And some people do, like kids won't take it at weekends. And as kids get older, then they can decide, that they're just going to take it for particular exams or whatever, or when they really, really need to focus. There is a longer acting medication which you take every day, and that requires a build up in your system. And not everyone can tolerate the short acting. So there's this whole, what they call it, titration. There's quite a bit of working out which is the best one for which child and going back and forth. But that one you would be on for a period of time and you'd want to taper it off because
Right.
there's a build up in your system. I mean, the other thing that some people with ADHD will say to me is that it makes them feel very different. Some kids don't like that. They say, I feel like it changes my personality. So they won't want to be on it for those reasons. So, it's not, there are downsides for sure. And you're always trying to kind of make a balanced decision about what's best for this particular child.
And we've got a question there whether, given what you've said about finding the right dose, the right long or short acting, when to take it for individuals, do you think that it's reviewed sufficiently if somebody's in the CAM system, or now, I don't know, do people get it prescribed by their GP now? It used to be you didn't, but what, are we reviewing the drug treatment enough
I mean, I
given
would,
brain
yeah,
development?
I would say systematically, probably not. I think, I don't know who's writing that, but I think definitely I've known of cases where it will, usually you would have to have a psychiatric or pediatric assessment in order to get the diagnosis and the medication. Then they might hand it on to the GP. But I think it's a good question when we should be reviewing it. I think some kids can be on it for a long period of time and nobody really thinks, is this the right dose? Is this the right thing? Should we try a period without it? So sometimes I think parents really have to be the driver of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of course the other side effect is to do with diet and weight and sleep. So one of the things that the short-acting medication does is it suppresses appetite.
Yeah.
So some kids can lose a lot of weight, and we have to really be vigilant about that. We have to think about their growth and development. It's crucially important.
And there's more now written and researched around nutrition. Is there advice you would give to parents or carers about nutrition in particular?
I mean, you know what? My probably quite annoying answer to that is
A
I think
healthy
it's
diet.
important. I think it's really important, but exactly telling you what and when is more difficult. I mean, obviously, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm not sure that the research is really strong enough, to be honest.
Yeah,
You really want to have good randomized control trials. So I think it's a bit of checking out with your own child
yeah,
what's working and what's not working. I mean, definitely when we think about things like numbers, about sugar, those kinds of things, for all of us, it's going to make our brain go up and down. It's not very good for regulation. So we really do have to think about it. I don't think we know enough about it, to be honest,
yeah.
to be able to really say exactly what some people should be following and some shouldn't.
And the advice we give people in general about symptoms and diet is that kind of trial and error.
Yeah.
Cut out
Yeah.
the gluten or cut out the sugar, see how
Yeah.
that affects your
Exactly.
symptoms.
I know.
There's just a comment from a parent. The difference medication made for my youngest child was great once she had a suitable, stable
Oh,
dose.
yeah.
She finally was able to focus in school and actually learning. She was coming on leaps and bounds with numeracy and literacy. 8-hour release meds we were reviewed every 3 months via CAMS. Also, we only use medication on school days. Luckily for us, there were no side effects. So that's something to
So
think about.
positive.
Would you only use it during the week and not at
Yeah.
holidays or weekends? And it sounds like you're getting a lot of support from CAMS, which is also good.
That's such a great story. I'm really so pleased to hear that I think it's Sally. Yeah, so good to hear. See, it really does work for some kids.
Yeah.
So it's really worth a go if your child is struggling.
And just to move on and think about school and education, which is where often some of the challenges in particular arise, because not every school is able to cope with that range of diversity.
Yeah.
If your child is struggling at school and you think or you know it's because of a diagnosis, what advice would you give to parents on how to work with the school?
Yeah, I mean, I think schools are a bit overwhelmed at the moment, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because there is such an increase in recognition of neurodiversity. And the SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator, are often feeling very overwhelmed. So it can be really tricky. The things I think are important. The first thing is communication. And I think sometimes we can be tempted to wait until things go wrong and then go in. But I think what's a real advantage is to say, look, I know that my child struggles and is neurodiverse, to point out or say to the teacher, I think this might be a problem. Can you have a look out for this? And then say, can we check in regularly? So can I check in with you? Could we have I don't know however long the teacher will give you, can we have a 20-minute check-in at half term and make it a regular check-in? And even when things are going okay, keep checking in. Because if you think that a teacher has often 30 kids, they have a lot of kids to focus on. And I think what you're doing with those meetings is just making them make sure that they pay attention to your child and they think carefully. And you might be able to notice things. I mean, particularly if we think about girls with ADHD, often in the primary years, they will go unrecognized and they won't be picked out. And that is because they often don't cause a problem. And, we can't really blame the teacher, but they're sitting there and they look like they're focusing and they're doing all the right things, but they're working really hard. They call it masking. Also kids with autism, to be honest, often the girls with autism are working really hard to do what the teacher wants them to do. So the teacher can miss it. They go, oh, I don't think there's a problem at all. But then if you say to them, can you try and just notice a little bit and see, because she says to me that she loses focus in maths. She says to me she's spending a lot of time looking out the window, and then the teacher might look and go, oh yeah, I did actually notice that. So I think communication is and having a good relationship with the teacher is really important. I mean, what they have at schools are these, what they call pupil passports, or if a child really struggles, an individual education plan. And that shows the accommodations that the schools are implementing. So make sure you know what those are. And I think it's so important to try to make sure that you have collaboration. So whatever you're working on at home, they're working on at school. That gives the child a kind of some continuity in their life. So if you are working on an executive function skill, let's say flexibility is one that I might work on with a family. So a child might come and see me, maybe they have an autism diagnosis and the parent is saying, if there's a change of plan or if things don't go her way, she has an absolute meltdown and it's really hard for us to manage. Now that's flexibility, that's a skill. So what I would do is work with the parent and say, first of all, we need to talk about flexibility. So we need to point out when you're being flexible, point out when you're watching a film and someone's being flexible, when you're out in the street. So make it a thing so that kids tune into it. I had to be really flexible last night because I was so looking forward to going to this restaurant with my friend and she was ill and she cancelled last minute. And it really challenged my flexibility. When you pick them up from school, you might say to them, instead of how was your day or what did you eat for lunch, Did you have to be flexible today? Was flexibility called on? And then kids can really tune into what this concept is. And in time, in the moment, you can bring it into the moment and say, I think flexibility is getting in the way here. There's been a change of plan, and that really is going to call on your flexibility, and think about strategies that you had. Now, if you're doing that at home and you can say to the teacher, I'm working on flexibility, and they use the same language, then, that's going to be such a kind of cohesive experience for your child. And they're going to be much more able, to work on that together and feel like everybody is supporting them.
That's a really good example. And yeah, I've seen that in members of my family, and just to
Right.
be able to talk about flexibility, I think
I
is rather
know.
than say, tell them off or whatever.
Yeah, don't be
It,
so difficult or
yeah,
something like that. Oh, there
uh-huh,
she goes again.
uh-huh.
Just go, wow. I mean, yeah, with our partners, all of this stuff is very helpful for marriages.
Oh, that's true. Why couldn't you have planned that?
Yeah, exactly. If you have a partner who's always late, just go, your time management is, I think, was getting in the way. Or do you know what? It's really important that we're on time when we go and visit my parents. Let's really think ahead of time about time management. And do you see it kind of
Yeah, yeah.
takes it out of you? It takes it away from you a little bit. Doesn't feel quite so personal.
And when we were talking before, you were saying you also run courses for parents. Can you
Yeah.
say a bit about that, and what are some of the common issues that parents bring and try and
Yeah.
resolve in these courses?
Yeah, so there's a particular course called Connected Teens that I've been involved in writing, and it's a small group. We do it online, and sometimes we can do it face to face. But it's 6 sessions, and each session has a little bit of knowledge, so you're learning a little bit, and then quite a bit of self-reflection. Because being a parent is really all about reflecting on yourself and seeing what gets in the way from you, between you and your child. So, the teenagers can be really challenging as a parent. If you think about all the things that teenagers are doing, they're turning away from you, they're pushing you away, they want to do things their way, they're taking risks. They can present as quite challenging behavior. So, yeah, so parents will come along. We talk about the teenage brain, we talk all about the neuroscience. It's so instructive. I think we think that what's going on is damaging or difficult, or isn't there a bug in the system? But when you really understand what teenagers are trying to do, it's very instructive for what they need from us.
Hmm.
So that's a lot of it. And then also, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people on this call, professionals anyway, will know about attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory. So we really think about what that looks like in the teenage years. So attachment theory tells us that people, I mean, in all relationships, it's about going away and coming back, isn't it? With our attachment figure, we go and we come back, we go and we come back. And teenagers are doing that in spades. They're taking big risks and going out, and that can be terrifying for parents and quite rejecting for parents. And then they come back in with these huge emotions that they deliver to you in the form of grumpiness or meltdowns or a puddle on the floor. And so there's a lot, if we can understand that and work out what they need from us in those moments, it's easier for us, but it's absolutely definitely easier for them, and it's supporting their brain growth. And we think a bit about conflict, we think about repair in relationships, which is really important. We think about how to be with other people in emotions, like one of the kind of magic glue of connection in relationships. So it's really powerful. If anyone's interested, I run it through a charity called Connected Lives. And we're going to start training people in delivering it, actually. We're at that point now, so
Oh,
it's
that's
very
good.
powerful. Yeah.
So people can look it up if they're interested in that, and it's online, so you can be anywhere
Yeah.
and do it, which is really helpful to know. And
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about some of the challenges that parents might be facing.
Mm.
Some of them must come to you saying, "Well, I just feel a failure. It must be
Mm.
my fault that my child's struggling at school or whatever." How do we
Mm.
help parents care for themselves and
Mm.
help themselves?
Yeah. Such an important question. I think there's actually so much shame and blame around parenting. Um, parenting didn't ever used to be a thing.
I
There
know.
wasn't even a word called parenting, was there?
Yeah.
Like when our kids, I mean, when I was a kid, I don't think people said, "Am I a good parent? Am I a bad parent?" It's kind of it's got a life of its own. And so one of the things actually, so that I think a really helpful little template, let me give you this, that we think about for parents is the three C's. So what we always want to be is curious, like asking what's really going on. So that's what's really going on for my child. Is there a teenage brain drive going on here? What do they, what's their behavior telling me about what's going on for them? But we have to be curious about ourselves. Wow, I had such a big reaction to what happened to my child there. I wonder what that was. Then we have to be compassionate and understand what our teen is going through, but also be compassionate with ourselves and that we're only human too. And then the third C is courage. And we have to be courageous enough to hold boundaries with teenagers. It's absolutely huge. They're meant to push up against us. They're meant to push up against our boundaries. And we have to be courageous enough to know when we need to step back, to know when we need to support and help ourselves. And I think parental burnout is something that a lot of people are experiencing, where things feel very overwhelming, when you just feel like you've kind of lost motivation towards what you're doing, or even for your kids. So we have to watch out for that and just be very aware of that kind of blaming, that voice in your head that says, why can other people do it and I can't do it? It's not true. Everybody is struggling. Literally everybody is struggling, even, us professionals. I've got kids, mine are in their 20s actually, but yeah, I mean, there were really hard points where I'm in a puddle thinking, God, I just don't know what to do with this situation. And knowing that there's a lovely phrase of being good enough,
Yeah.
being a good enough parent. There's actually some amazing research. They did this with infants, and they looked at the percentage of time that the infants and the parents were in kind of beautiful interaction with each other. And it's only 30% of the time. We're not supposed to be able to give our kids what they need 100% of the time. They wouldn't develop any resilience if
Yeah.
that were the case. We just need to be good enough. And sometimes knowing what good enough means, which is really about letting them go, about welcoming them back, about reflecting on ourselves and saying, why did I lose it in that situation? And often the reason that we lose it and feel very overwhelmed as a parent is because of what happened to us when we were kids.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about blaming our parents. They were imperfect, we're imperfect, everybody is imperfect, but it's about saying, I mean, just to give you a little example, if, anger and conflict is often something that people struggle with. So if your parents had a difficult relationship with anger or conflict, maybe they became very angry, or they didn't show anger at all. When your child brings anger to you, you're going to have a weird relationship with it because you never had that experience of how can I be angry with somebody or someone be angry with me, and we work that out together. So we might have to develop that ability in ourselves.
Yeah. It's so easy just to repeat the mistakes that you were very aware of when you were growing up, isn't
Yeah.
it? And
Yeah.
it's breaking out of some of these patterns. And
Yeah.
yeah, we all need help to do that.
I mean, I suppose one of the things we could think about is why there's been this increase, and why is this increase in neurodiversity? Is it something like in the water or in the air or something? And I think what we understand is going on is that there's actually just an increased awareness of
Yeah.
differences
Yeah.
between us. There's been a lot of advocacy groups who have worked to kind of increase our understanding and acceptance. And just generally, I think there's been this kind of cultural shift to be more inclusive. I think in the olden days, maybe when we were all kids, children were a bit seen and not heard. If you didn't fit into the system, you were the odd one. And now we're able to say, okay, we have a system. And most people can fit within that system pretty well. But the people who are not fitting in that system, they're not bad or difficult or odd. They're just different in a little way, and we need to understand that. So I think that's been a really positive thing. Social media, for sure, has had an impact. I think it's been very positive because a lot of people with neurodiversity have been able to share their experience. A lot of people can then see themselves in other people, and that can be really nice to know. I'm not the only one that's like
Yeah.
that. So that's kind of really positive. I think there's a bit of a downside, and the downside is that there maybe is a bit of over-identification and maybe a bit of over-diagnosis, particularly with mental health, actually. Well, maybe even with neurodiversity, but being a teenager, part of the job is to have emotional ups and downs, to have a lot of highs and lows and emotions. And if whenever we're low, or for a lot of people when they're low, we call it a mental health problem as opposed to part of normal variation, I don't think that's going to be a positive thing in the long run. Not for that person. It kind of names it, it reifies it, it makes it bigger than it is. And also, I think it undermines the significance of when you do have a serious mental health problem, which really is incredibly functionally impairing. And maybe that's the same for neurodiversity. We might recognize a bit of, an ADHD symptom in ourselves. But for somebody who has very severe ADHD, that's very, very impairing to their life. And we mustn't, if we meld it all together, we mustn't underestimate the impact on that person's life.
Yeah, I I always find it strange because it's a kind of throwaway remark for people. Oh, he's on the spectrum or she's on the
Yeah,
spectrum, and I never like that. I think, well, we're
yeah,
all on a spectrum. Yeah, that's why it's called a
yeah,
spectrum. It's
exactly.
where are we on it, and we've all
Yeah.
got bits of characteristics and etc., which I think you've talked about, and I'm sure you're right that a lot of this is more identification and better diagnosis, but we do see a lot of evidence now of worsening mental health in our young people.
Mm.
Post-pandemic,
Yeah.
social media is talked about quite a lot. They're living in a difficult world
Yeah.
with political unrest, climate change. Do
Mm.
you think that's overemphasized or?
Well, no, there is a very real increase. I think that has really been shown in research, particularly for girls and particularly for girls around 16,
Yeah,
around that kind of age. And I think a lot of people will talk about social media and the impact, and there's definitely something about social comparison that goes on with social media that I think is very unhelpful for a teenage brain. So we are seeing a very real increase. I think my worry is that sometimes normal variation is being
it's
interpreted
labeled.
as a mental health
Yeah,
difficulty when it's actually part of normal variation. And I think it's incredibly difficult for adults, for parents and teachers to know what's what. But I think what we need to try to do is to listen to emotions and to validate people's experience, but also make sure that we try to push them forward if we can, rather than allow the mental health difficulty to become too big a concept in their life. It can become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I
yeah,
think, sometimes, and it can stop people from pushing through the discomfort. And
yeah,
part of life is pushing through a bit of discomfort.
yeah,
So, but it's tricky because we always want to validate how somebody feels. But sometimes if you validate and say, I really hear that that's hard and I think you can do it, that's what somebody needs in order to push through.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Well, that's good advice. I think we were always told to pull ourselves together, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think is the most helpful advice if you're not
No, that
feeling.
wouldn't be.
So, Sally, I struggle a bit just now with my ASD 16-year-old girl and rules and boundaries around her internet use. She
Mm,
doesn't see her vulnerabilities and thinks there is no problem with what she's doing. It's very hard to get her to see where the dangers lie. And
mm,
we've talked about this in previous sessions about how do you work with your teenager on the
mm,
use of social media and internet use.
mm.
What would you say to that, Bettina?
Really difficult. It's really the big question of our time, honestly. I think it's just the hardest thing. In some ways, I feel quite lucky to have had my kids when I did. They didn't have phones. They were just coming online when my kids. I think it's really, really difficult. And I think what you're describing here is quite complicated because she's 16, so she's getting towards the age of being able to consent, but she also has some you say she's autistic, so she can probably get quite fixated and stuck on things and may struggle a little bit with social interpretation. So I think she doesn't see her vulnerability is what you're saying. I suppose I wonder, I mean, it's always difficult, obviously, to give advice for individual people without knowing much of the detail, but I wonder how much you can focus on helping her to understand her autism. Obsessed with things, yeah. But understanding her autism away from the screen, first of all, and what that really means and how that shows up in her life. Because if she can embrace and accept that I am somebody who, does tend to become quite obsessed with things, and that's something I need to manage in my life, then eventually you might be able to get to the point where you can get her to apply that to her phone use. I think one of the things that we get into with kids is that we can be very anti the phone, without accepting the good bits of the phone, that kids hold on to it and they don't want to share with us the difficult bits around the phone. If we can try to get into a conversation about there are good bits and there are bad bits of the phone, tell me about what you love. Tell me about what's engaging you. Can you show me what the feed is? What is it about that makes you so interested? And actually, autistic girls often will want to focus on relationships. They can watch like programs about relationships and friendships over and over again as a way to understand the social world. So if you can, join her in her interest, then you are much more likely, I think, to be able to begin to have an influence. And it becomes a bit less us and them. I'm trying to stop you. You're trying to do more. You can get a bit more into her space and join her in it. You might be able to come up with some collaborative rules together. But I'm not saying this is easy. I think it's really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. There was an example in a previous session where a mother of a much younger child was saying, well, we looked at TikTok together, which you can probably do with a younger child. With a 16-year-old, that's maybe more difficult, and talked about it together.
Yeah.
But you've got to get a willingness to do that, haven't you?
Yeah.
And it's partly some of the, it's my thing and I don't want to share it all.
Well, it's really difficult. I mean, I suppose what you could say there is, look, can you tell me a bit about what worries you about me seeing?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, we can be, if we can be really respectful to teenagers, as a lot of the neuroscience is showing us, they're very, very sensitive to status and respect, to how other people see them. It's part of their self-identity development and their social development. So if we can be really respectful and say, I really want to, I see, can you tell me, is there something that I do when I watch it with you that you don't like? And how would you like me to be if we watch it together? And they might say, I just want you to not say that. I just feel like you're judging me. Okay, I'm not judging you. I'm just interested. Is there something that I say or do? Yeah, I don't want you to say anything. Okay, I'm not going to say anything. And you raise your eyebrows in that weird way. I'm really going to try not to raise my eyebrows. So you really kind of take some feedback from them and try to persuade them to say, look, let's give it a try. I'm just going to watch a little bit. I'm not going to make judgment. I'm just really interested in what you find so interesting about it. But give that a try.
It's quite hard for a parent, isn't it, to say, give me the feedback when I put that expression on or whatever. But you're right. Yeah. That's the communication, isn't it, which we're trying to get better at.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating session, and just being able to think about my own views about all of this is really helpful. So I hope people will reflect a lot on what you said. That, as you know, the session has been recorded, so you can go back and listen to it again, or be able to send it on to other people if you feel that some of the things that Bettina said would be particularly helpful. And your book sounds fascinating. So The Teenage Brain sounds like it's a good one for us all to have a look at. And
The Incredible Teenage Brain, actually.
The Incredible Teenage Brain, which is a much better title, isn't it? The Incredible Teenage Brain. Yeah. because it is incredible, just all that
It
development that's
really
going
is.
on.
Yeah.
So thanks to you all for joining, and
Mm,
we look forward to seeing you again. And thanks so much to Bettina. That's been
mm.
really informative and helpful. And
That's a
other
pleasure.
people saying thank you for that chat and
Mm.
for your input as well. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.